Hello, I'm Riz Khan. Welcome to the show. From Australia to the US, 300 million people around the world live in jurisdictions that allow residents a choice to end their lives prematurely in order to escape the pain and indignity of a protracted death. The UK Parliament recently became the latest legislature to take a step towards legalizing assisted dying in England and Wales. MPs were freed from party loyalties for an emotional, respectful debate that contrasted with the political combat that often punctuates the House of Commons. At its conclusion, a majority voted in favour of a bill that would permit some adults to use drugs prescribed to end their lives. But there were conditions. They would have to be diagnosed as terminally ill with no more than 6 months to live, mentally capable of making the decision, and free from coercion to do so. Well, the bill must pass several more rounds of intense scrutiny from parliamentarians before it can become law. But the issue sparked a passionate national debate with voices from different perspectives raising matters of ethics, faith and justice. At the same time, philosophers were preparing to cross continents for a conference in the Saudi capital Riyadh to discuss quality of life. In this episode, we'll consider attitudes to life and death from an ethical, practical and philosophical point of view. Dame Esther Rantzen is a celebrated British journalist and activist whose TV show, That's Life, ran for over 20 years, reaching audiences of more than 20 million viewers. Her campaigns have helped save children from abuse and the elderly from neglect. But now in her 80s, she's become a prominent figure in the campaign for assisted dying after revealing she's received a terminal cancer diagnosis. Her daughter and fellow campaigner, Rebecca Wilcox, joins me now. Rebecca Wilcox, it's really good to have some time with you, and it's sad that we're talking under these circumstances, but it's a very important subject. So for people like myself, we grew up seeing your mother, and half the country pretty much tuned into her every week on TV. And she was known as quite a staunch campaigner. Now, she bettered a lot of lives through those campaigns, and it seems she's taken on this one last campaign. I think you described it as her last campaign at your peril, something like that.
Yes, I said she doesn't want this to be known as her final campaign because there's still life in the old bird yet, is what she would say. And I would possibly get smacked over the head for saying that. Obviously, she doesn't agree with violence.
Now, the world got to know about Dame Esther's cancer when she revealed it on an interview that she had terminal cancer. And she also revealed that she was going to Dignitas, or signing up with Dignitas, the service in Switzerland that assists dying. Now, as your family would have already been aware, it seemed that her considerations were not so much for herself, but more about the impact it would have on the people around her, the people that she loved, perhaps facing prosecution for being involved in any way, as is the case with the law. So how did you and your family respond to your mother's decision?
It was an interesting one because whilst I've always been aware of her feelings towards end-of-life care and choice at the end of your life, I had no idea that she had signed up to Dignitas until she revealed it on a podcast. And I think a journalist rang me and asked me for a comment, which is pretty standard for growing up with my parents being in the public eye as they were. And so it wasn't a massive surprise, but it was, and it's in keeping with everything I know about her, but it was weirdly shocking because I felt that she wasn't near the end of her life. I felt that the treatment was going well. I love living in denial. It's not healthy. It's not good for you. I would never recommend it, but it helps me get through the day just to pretend that everything is okay. And the fact that she had gone about this with meticulous care and sorted out a future for herself that wouldn't hurt us showed how seriously she was taking this illness. I like to think of her as immortal and indomitable, and I think that was a bit of a shocking moment for me. I felt the rug pulled out.
There was also a massive reaction in the British media. There was a huge reaction with the public. Was Dame Esther surprised? Was she energized, or perhaps concerned at being part of this debate?
I think she accidentally fell into this debate and then realized it was meant to be. She sort of has an ability for touching on the zeitgeist. So I would say that happened when she did Child Watch, and out of that came Childline, the helpline for children. And when she wrote an article about loneliness, she received so many letters in response to that she set up Silverline, which was a helpline for older people who were feeling similar feelings. And then she talked about this, and it was absolutely the right time for the country to start considering it again. It had been 2015 when it was last debated in Parliament. It had sort of plateaued. And I think she lit a fire under it. And once she realized that this decision that she made for herself could help other people, that's always been her goal. She's never done anything for herself at the detriment for other people. She suddenly realized this was a subject that needed talking about, it needed airing. We need to talk about end of life care. Even if you disagree with the assisted dying bill, we need to talk about what happens at the end of your life, because sadly we are all going to die. So your family need to know what you want, what care you want, what choices you want to make. And that's what this bill is about. It's about giving you further choices in that matter.
Rebecca, your mother's not known for doing anything half-heartedly. And apparently she contacted every member of parliament in the UK government before the debate. Is that the case?
Oh, yes, absolutely. She knew that she wasn't physically able to go to the debate. She sent me in her stead, and I sat at the top and sat on my hands and tried not to shout at people when I assumed that they were saying something that I disagreed with or she disagreed with me. And because she couldn't be there, she sent this heartfelt letter filled with comment and fact that she really hoped they would sit and listen to, because that's what she wanted. She wanted everybody in the room to listen to the other side, regardless of the point of view that you come into the room with. Listen to the other side and then make a choice. We know that the public are majority in favor of changing the rules around assisted dying. We just wanted that reflected in the room.
Now, Rebecca, your father, Desmond Wilcox, is also a renowned journalist and filmmaker. And I gather both he and your mother had touched on this subject in documentaries in the past. Tell us about that.
They were trailblazers. They would go where subjects hadn't gone before. They didn't mind talking about the things that were difficult. So it doesn't surprise me at all that they covered this subject. Most recently, Mum made a series called How to Have a Good Death. And it was a really interesting eye-opener for her. And I think paved the way for this campaign, because she saw people suffer in a way that was not palatable, for want of a better word, and could not be helped by palliative care. She saw people's shunts fall out, and she saw people's morphine drop off, and she saw people's pain surpass the opioid barrier. And I think that created a deep-seated belief in her that she did not want to go that way, that she wanted something far more peaceful. And my father felt the same way. He had a DNR, he had a do not resuscitate, that was very clear. And I remember in the hospital when he was dying, they were trying to resuscitate him, and Mom was screaming at me on the phone because she had popped home to change her outfit. Not out of it, that sounds ridiculous. She'd popped home to refresh herself because we'd been there a few hours, and unfortunately she wasn't there as he started crashing. So she's screaming at me on the phone that he has a DNR, he has a DNR. And I wasn't able to, or I couldn't, some reason it felt wrong for me to stop the medical process, but actually that's what he wanted. And I really hope that I would be brave enough to do that now. But he never wanted to have a catastrophic brain injury from lack of oxygen, which was what was happening, and therefore live in a vegetative state. He wanted to have a good death, which is what the Health and Social Care Select Committee report talked about. And Mum absolutely echoed that. So their work throughout their lives always touched on difficult subjects and brilliant people talking about difficult things. And I'm not surprised they ended up with the decisions they ended up with.
It was a very difficult situation, of course, you found yourself in, and there are many perspectives on this subject, with some people very, very heavily opposed to it. They see it as assisted suicide, rather than just assisted dying. And I wonder, your mother would have heard a number of these arguments. Was she ever swayed by some of these viewpoints? Did it affect her in any way?
She has listened. She has listened. What she asked of the MPs to listen to her point of view, she has listened to other people. Otherwise, she is not the fair and rational woman that we know and love. She absolutely understands that people have differing points of view, that some people see that there's a sanctity of life, that some people see that there could be a coercive nature to this, that vulnerable elements of our society could be put at risk. But she and I have both looked through all the evidence and know that choice, according to the bill that has been set out, has an amazing set of safeguards around it. The safeguards are the cornerstone of this bill. At the moment, there aren't safeguards. At the moment, we're sort of living in a weird Wild West because nobody knows what to do and the law is a mess. So things can happen without regulation, whereas this would bring in regulation and legislation, and people would be able to monitor it very closely. I mean, it asks for the person that's asking to have an assisted death to apply 8 separate times. And those 8 separate times are scrutinized by doctors and lawyers or judges, depending upon how it proceeds with the committee stages. So there was no way that we didn't listen to other people's point of view, but the thing that kept coming back to us was this is choice, and faith is always choice. And I have many family members who are strong believers in the sanctity of life, but they would never believe that my mum should live in suffering and a prolonged existence just because of their faith.
Actually, you raise an interesting point there, Rebecca. And having spoken to people who are opposed to the bill, and you yourself will know the arguments very well, I'm sure, that issue of being coerced by others prematurely to end one's life, or even perhaps self-coercion came up. The idea that people might be guilty enough and feel that they need to end their lives because of pressure and burden they might put on others, came up also in the debate. And I wonder, did that issue ever come up among your family members?
What I would say about that is that there was an MP that stood up during the debate and he said, this is not life or death, this is death or death. It was such a clear, bold statement that I hadn't heard before. I've heard people talk about this is not ending life, this is shortening death, but it makes it really clear that this is for terminal patients, people who have 6 months, 12 months left to live. It is not for somebody that is considered a burden on society. What a revolting phrase that is. Anybody that thinks they are a burden on society needs to have an adjusted view, because we need to value everybody, regardless of whatever supposed cost they may have. Everybody has a right to life. Kit Malthouse, the MP, said that we are not a nation of granny killers. And I think that is true. I think we, in the main, generally, absolutely adore our elders and respect them and look after them.
It's interesting, Rebecca, you raised that issue of safeguards, the safeguards that are there already, and the fact some are worried of the bill, allowing the scope to widen. And I wonder, if you could see any other potential safeguards that might really add another lock to the idea that the bill couldn't go any wider.
Well, I'm not a lawmaker. I'm not very well versed in politics. I've come to this very green, and it's been a very steep education for me in how contrary points of view can cause such emotive arguments. I've had a lot of threats against my life, against my family's safety, just because I believe in choice at the end of this world. So at the end of your life. So it's an interesting one for me that you talk about safeguards when the people that are throwing around the violent terms are usually on the opposite side to me. We turn up to every debate, every campaign, every rally. I'm alongside a campaign called Dignity in Dying, and that's exactly how we try and proceed at all these rallies, with dignity, with compassion, with empathy, and we're hugging each other and we're chatting to each other. And I'm alongside people who are really suffering from very serious terminal diagnoses, including this wonderful woman called Sophie who has stage 4 terminal breast cancer and is allergic to opioids. So at the end of her life, she sees nothing but pain. She cannot have any pain relief. So how does the gentle death of palliative care work for someone like her? With the safeguards that we want, I think this is the most safe bill. In fact, there have been criticisms of it for having too many safeguards. I think at the moment, with the country not decided, with a bit of a rift going on, even though the majority are in favour of it, I think it's good to proceed with this level of safety at this time.
Referring to the stage where things are right now, you indicated your mother was unable to go for the first vote. You were there. How did both of you and your mother, react to the outcome?
Um, it was so strange being there for the debate. I mean, it was a phenomenal moment that I will never, ever forget. It's an extraordinary place, as I'm sure you know, and it was filled to the rafters, which on a Friday is apparently quite unusual. There was not an ounce of seating left. And at the end of this very, very detailed debate that lasted 5 hours, and everyone said that was really short. I'm not sure I could have stood another 2 hours of it. But I know that there were more people that wanted to stand up and speak. But at the end of the debate, when they all went out to vote, and the speaker shouted out the results, and then there was silence. And I looked across to someone who was sat on the opposite side, who I knew supported my point of view, and he put two thumbs up. And I was so relieved he did, because the silence meant that I wasn't sure what had happened, because usually there's a hurrah from whoever wins. But it's such a serious subject. And at the end of the day, if we win, or, it doesn't feel like winning. It just feels like the ability to choose has been given to you to die. That is not something you cheer. Obviously, it's not. That's why it was taken so seriously. So I leapt out of the room and ran down the stairs. There is absolutely no phone signal anywhere in the Houses of Parliament. So I had to run to the river to get through to Mum, where I spoke to her, and I felt dizzy and sick and confused, and she and I were both echoing this. It's brilliant, it's amazing, thank goodness it's got through this stage, but wow, there's a lot of work left to do. Goodness, there were a lot of people that were putting up barriers to it already. And and then she said to me, "Oh, I feel like I have to live for the next one now." I said, "Yes, of course you do, but you don't have to live for the next debate. You have to live forever for us, your family, and maybe think about the debate."
You know, Rebecca, you said you talked about how your mother reacted when you called her when you got out the Houses of Parliament to the River Thames to get a signal. And she said, the next one is coming up. So, of course, I guess you both recognize that at this stage, it could be passed, it could be amended, it could even fail. Having played such a big part in the campaign, doesn't your mother want to kind of take a step back and rest and enjoy the rest of her life?
I tell you, she says to me, "I'm so bored with talking about dying." So I think she probably does, but I also think that she won't, because that's not the sort of person that she is. I don't think she'll let go of this. I think we've both received so many messages and letters and emails from families that are going through very similar situations to us, that don't have the privilege of being able to afford the £15,000 to fly off to Switzerland, that are facing whatever will happen here and have no way out, or who have been through it before, who have either been to Switzerland, or who have come across a loved one who is attempting suicide or has a botched suicide attempt. There's so many awful stories that are rolling around our heads, and so many people that we know are dependent upon this bill, that I don't think there's any way that we could stop now. The next stage is very difficult. It's the committee stage. The bill will be gone through line by line by line, and I can only hope it gets through. It's weird how our country is so recalcitrant on this topic, whereas we are leaders in so many other areas of health and social care. So I just hope that we are a bit more open to another way of looking at this.
Well, your mother mentioned in a recent interview that you'll be hosting the family Christmas event this year. Assuming she is able to come, what will Christmas with Esther Rantzen be like this year? And what memories do you have of Christmases together?
Yes, I'm going to be hosting my mum and my sister at some point over the Christmas period. They're going to come and stay. We haven't worked out the logistics yet, but I'm definitely, whenever that is, we'll have a massive turkey. I think I've ordered three. I don't know how much turkey one person can eat, but her plate is going to be full. She doesn't have much of an appetite at the moment, but she's going to have every single trimming, every single type of stuffing, many types of Brussels sprouts, because we have quite a few opinions on how those should be cooked. Christmas with Esther is always fun. It's magical. She's naughty. She's brilliant. She's fun. She loves games. So we're going to play all sorts of games. I've got some fantastic new board games, competitive and not so. Anyone that takes her on in Scrabble, good luck to you. I have never won against her, but it's just going to be lovely. And I've bought her some excessively luxurious presents, which I hope she won't mind, and many gorgeous fluffy slippers. So please don't tell her I've done that too. and I'm decorating absolutely every surface of my house. There is not one vertical, horizontal, or diagonal that isn't covered in glitter and gold. So it's a bit much, but I love it.
I'm sure, Rebecca Wilcox, that pretty much everyone is wishing you and your family and your mother especially a wonderful Christmas celebration this year. Your mother, for people of my generation, I can say almost unanimously was a national treasure, has been a national treasure. And it's incredibly impressive that she's still doing so much to this stage. So more power to you, more power to her. And I wish you well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'll pass on the message.
Polls show that around 2/3 of British people supported the idea of legalising some form of assisted dying. But it's the members of Parliament who will ultimately decide whether and in what form such a law can proceed. The bill was brought before the House of Commons by the Labour Party MP Kim Leadbeater, who only entered politics 3 years ago after her sister Jo Cox MP was murdered. My next guest is also a Labour MP, but he voted against the bill. Barry Gardner's history of service spans more than a quarter of a century, and as he told me, his decision was made after much soul-searching. Barry Gardner, thank you very much for joining the show. Now, when you entered Parliament in 1997 as a young MP, what sense did you have you'd be involved in debates of such importance to the national conscience?
I think anyone who thinks about going into politics, national politics, has to realize that there will be times when they are considering issues which really are about life or death. In my own parliamentary career, I've had that on a number of occasions. We've had, obviously, debates on war. We've had debates previously on assisted dying. So it's something which everyone who goes into politics at that level really should have at the forefront of their mind, and they should have thought very deeply about it. And I think that was one of the features of the recent debate that we had. It was a very thoughtful debate.
You voted against the bill and spoke in the debate. What key points did you want to make?
I think it's important that we recognize that when we're legislating, we are not simply expressing our own personal preference. And this was the fundamental internal conflict that I had with myself, because I could envisage myself being in that situation as outlined in this bill, with perhaps 6 months yet to live, with a terminal disease, and depending on the nature of that disease, perhaps wanting to avail myself of what this law would propose, which is to be able to have an assisted death. So at a personal level, I could see that. And I also listened very carefully to the stories of many of my colleagues and some of my constituents whose family members had been in that position, but hadn't been able to avail themselves of an assisted death. Some who'd taken their own life, but hadn't been able to have their final goodbyes with their family, because that would have implicated their family in assisting suicide, which is a criminal offense. So I had to think very hard about, was it my role to enact a law which would certainly bring comfort and relief to those people, or was it my role as a parliamentarian to pass legislation for the whole of society? And my fear was that if we passed the legislation that would undeniably bring that comfort and relief for so many, but I believe it would also have jeopardized those people who were, yes, in the situation at the end of their life with 6 months yet to live, but who thought, am I too much of a burden on my family? Should I just now opt for an early death? Is my living for another 6 months in this care home or with this care support going to eat so much up of the inheritance that my grandchildren might have on my death that I'm denying them their inheritance? And those are considerations that nobody at the end of their life should have to take into account.
Now, you're referring to guilt.
Misplaced guilt, because there is no guilt in living. Um, you know, you're not guilty for being alive. You are a valued, a treasured human being. And where we lose our capacity to see each other as that, then our society really has changed fundamentally.
But Mr. Gardner, in terms of not having somewhere to go, there are people, such as the famous British broadcaster Esther Rantzen, who's in her mid-80s and suffering from lung cancer, who said if she doesn't have the option in the UK, she'll go to Switzerland, to Dignitas, an organisation that does offer assisted dying. So by not giving them the option in the UK, aren't you simply driving them out?
Well, no, it doesn't force them out, but what it does, unfortunately, and here I feel this very keenly, the point that you make, because as Esther Rantzen wrote to me, as she did to many MPs, and her own witness, her own testimony of her situation was very powerful. And she made the point, I have the luxury, I am wealthy enough to be able to go to Switzerland, but there are people who are not. And therefore, at the moment, as the law stands, as a rich person, I can avail myself of the remedy that I want. I can exercise the choice that I wish to make, but a poor person cannot. And that's a very powerful argument. But as I say, I don't think it overrides the responsibility that I certainly felt to legislate for everyone in society and not just for those who felt themselves in that particular situation as wanting to have the assisted death.
It's interesting to note that this debate comes at a time when Britain has evolved into a multicultural and multi-faith society with representations of those groups in Parliament too. And I wonder, when it comes to religion and faith, in many cases assisted dying is seen as suicide, which is considered a sin, how those MPs were able to rationalise the debate in terms of their own beliefs.
The great thing about the debate was that it was incredibly respectful. No matter which side of the debate you were on, everybody listened with care and attention to what was being said. And obviously, many people of faith were influenced by their faith. But that was why this was made a vote of conscience. It was not a whipped vote. It was not one that, and quite rightly, it should not be something that you say, oh, well, we have a manifesto commitment on something as deeply important to one's own sense of who one is, because this is one of the most deep ethical questions that one can have. And it was right that it was a free vote. So I think religion did not actually ostensibly play a part in the debate. People weren't saying this is prohibited by God, but obviously their own sense of where they stood in the debate probably was. But they then had to construct their arguments in a way that appealed to the wider audience who may not have shared their religious beliefs.
Supporters of the bill, such as MP Kim Leadbeater, point to the safeguards they tried to build in, such as 2 doctors, a judge, 6 months of life expectancy, and heavy jail sentences for those who might ill-advise or coerce someone into assisted dying. So you had talked about wanting another level of assurance. What would that be?
I think there was a recognition, not just from myself, but from others, that there needed to be additional safeguards. For example, the situation of the judge signing it off, that is really a technical formality. It's not there's no investigative powers that the judge has. He simply has to check whether 2 doctors have agreed. I'm afraid that my view on the way in which the medical profession might operate in this is that it is not even doctors who spoke in the debate accepted that 6 months was a very movable feast. Sometimes they give a prognosis, and that prognosis is entirely wrong. I think there was a concern that we would develop into two sets of doctors, those who were known to favor assisted dying and those who were not. And if you wanted that, you simply went to the ones who would sign you off without too much questioning. And I think that is, it was a safeguard, but I don't think it was an adequate safeguard.
Well, Mr. Gardner, the House of Commons is often known as a bit of a bullpit with impolite yelling and jeering, whereas many people describe this debate as very respectful and deeply moving. It seems to be quite a contrast from the usual scenes.
Yes, it really was, and goodness knows, I wish many more debates were conducted in that tone. I have to tell you, I think what made it very evident was there was one member of Parliament who entirely misjudged the mood of Parliament. I won't name who it was, but he sought to make a political point in his contribution. He sought to make a political point about the government's recent announcement of winter fuel payments and the taking away of the winter fuel payments for people who were not on the lowest band of benefit. And the whole House groaned. It was a gut groan. It was a, oh, and it seemed that all of Parliament, whichever side you were on, were saying, what are you doing? You're trying to turn this into a political debate. It's not. It's bigger than that, and we have to be bigger than that. And in that sense, I really think Parliament showed itself at its best because it was respectful. It was a debate which was characterized by listening and trying to respond seriously to the points that each other were making.
Yes, as you say, many people did describe this as parliamentary debate at its best. And I wonder what lessons could be learned from this, especially at a time when people around the world are starting to lose faith in politics.
Yes. Well, the obvious thing is let's have more free votes. Let's have more conscience votes. And perhaps MPs, instead of feeling that they have to troop through the lobbies after their whips, will think more deeply about the consequences of the legislation that they're passing. So I wouldn't like people to get the impression that the Commons is all, shallow and point scoring. It's not. But certainly this debate, I think, did the House proud. And even though I was on the losing side, I recognize that probably the majority of the British population, certainly in the polling that's been taken, were on the side of the bill. They wanted to see the bill go forward. And in that way, I have to respect democracy and hope that I'm wrong, and that the fears that I have for this bill will not come to pass.
Sir, I understand that your parents died, sadly, while you were still very young. And I wonder if you believe that palliative care has sufficiently improved since then to be a viable alternative to the thought of assisted dying.
Look, I think everybody in that debate was clear that we need to improve palliative care in this country. Palliative care can be wonderful, and I've seen some marvelous examples in my own constituency and in my own personal life. My own father, as you mentioned, he died of esophageal cancer, which is a really ghastly way to die. And so I think we all understand that we need better palliative care. But I don't want to make the mistake of thinking that palliative care can alleviate everything. people in hospices do wonderful jobs, absolutely wonderful jobs. But I do understand why there are some situations for some people where assisted death does seem the only viable option. And that obviously is what the majority of members of the House of Commons felt.
Well, this moment has been compared with other parliamentary debates on sensitive matters such as same-sex marriage, abortion, the repeal of the death penalty. And I wonder how it sits alongside debates that Parliament has to conduct on economic and social and defence matters.
Oh gosh, it's a very different thing, and that is why I think it has to be a vote of conscience, where every member of Parliament has the freedom to examine themselves, examine who they are, and examine who they feel the country ought to be, and to do the best for everybody in society. I often think of the writings of John Stuart Mill, the great libertarian Enlightenment philosopher of the 19th century. And he said a very strange thing, or people thought it was very strange. He said the reason that he was against the universal suffrage, the universal vote, was he believed that if everybody had the vote, then, and in those days it was only men, he said, men would come to regard the vote as an expression of their own private preference rather than as an expression of their public responsibility. Now, I think I disagree with his premise, because I think people always did use the vote as an expression of their own private preference. But it's a really fundamental principle that I think legislators need to always keep in mind. They're not legislating for what they would like. They're not legislating for what they think would benefit them or their particular group of people, or any particular group of people. They're there to legislate for the whole of society. And I think if we lose sight of that, then we lose really something that's very fundamental to our democracy. So these debates are very different. The debates you mentioned, ethical debates about the nature of life, the way in which our society regards life, when it begins, when it should end, how it should be conducted. Fundamental questions, very different from the education budget, very different from the issues of work and pensions and employment and industry, which we're doing all the time. But when you get that many serious people in a room taking the issue seriously, one has to hope that we arrive at a conclusion which does fit with our society and which does ultimately benefit the whole of our community.
Barry Gardiner, thank you very much for taking the time to give us your perspective on this debate. Thank you, sir.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Barry Gardiner ended our conversation by describing how he finds philosophy to be a helpful resource when considering decisions on important issues, including matters of life and death. Meanwhile, 4,000 miles, about 6,000 kilometers from London, a global gathering of philosophers took place in Saudi Arabia. Quality of life was the main theme of the Riyadh International Philosophy Conference, featuring a diverse group of prominent thinkers. I was keen to hear their thoughts on the issues that were being debated in Britain. Dr. Joseph Cohen, I'm very happy to have a chance to chat with you. What's interesting is we're here at a philosophy conference in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia looking at something called quality of life. When it comes to quality of life, where does the whole concept of assisted dying fit in?
Excellent question. First of all, thank you very much. Assisted dying. A very famous, important philosopher, Martin Heidegger, wrote in Being and Time, 1927, wrote that no one can take dying away from the person. No one can take someone's dying away from him or her.
A right to die.
That is, the experience of dying is always unsubstitutable. It cannot be taken away from anyone. My dying will be my own dying. Your dying will be your own dying, and no one will be able to take that away from you or I. So the experience of dying is a singular experience, right? The right to die is the right to live through that experience. That is the right to confront the experience of dying. I believe that this confrontation is a confrontation of human existence. Human existence needs to confront this dying because in this confrontation, it shows the possibility for the subject to project himself or herself into life.
But what's happened, Dr. Cohen, is that it's all become a legal matter now.
Right.
Not a philosophical one.
Right.
And that's where the complications come in. Who has the right to be involved, whether it's family members, friends, whatever? What right does the person who wants to die have? It's a very sensitive topic, and I can understand it because it brings in ethics, religion, and everything else. But when it comes to the idea of this debate, what should be the angles we as a society, global society, should look at?
I think we should definitely entertain the possibility of respecting human finitude. I think one of the major challenges of our time is to confront the finitude of our human existence. And in a certain manner, I think a lot of the problems of our epoch are linked to the idea that we can think beyond human finitude. We can think ourselves as almost infinite. I think we need to refocus on the possibility for human rationality to truly look at what the meaning of life is, what the quality of life is in the horizon of finitude. And in this sense, death, although it is the absolute master, to speak like Hegel, for example, the German philosopher, death is the absolute master. Death may not be that which is a radical interruption of humanity. On the contrary, it may precisely be the revelator of that which projects humanity. You see?
I guess the argument is death may be inevitable for all of us, but who should have a choice on when that event occurs?
But you see, even that question, although I understand why we're posing it, even that question is impossible to answer. Death is impossible to determine. Death is one's own, and yet at the same time, it's not one's own. I will be given my death, even if it's my own. You will be given your death, and it will only be yours, but it's not yours to have.
Let's pretend you're a lawyer defending someone who went through assisted dying.
Yeah.
How are you going to explain all this in court?
Yeah, it's obvious that the way I'm seeking to think the problem of dying is far removed from the idea of law, from the legal apparatus. Because I make a very sharp distinction between the law and justice. Perhaps being just towards death, towards the question of death, involves or engages our thinking beyond the law. That is, outside the sphere of law.
I think the UK, which is debating this right now, is in a very difficult position because, of course, it's combining religion, philosophy, ethics, and legality. If it's not too personal a question, would you opt for assisted dying?
Very, very complex question. Myself, and speaking strictly for myself, yes, I would. I think that confronting the question of death, confronting one's dying, is the most radical human experience. And in a certain manner, the courage it takes to confront that experience needs to be given to human finitude, needs to be allowed for in human experience. So yes, I would certainly give each and every one of us, as human existence, as existing humans, the possibility to confront this experience of dying.
And yet, it's seen as a sin in so many societies.
Yes.
How do we rationalize that?
Well, I think, yeah, it definitely is seen as a sin, but I think we can understand a certain manner of thinking the religious, even the ethical, in relation to human experience, which would also involve the idea of confronting the experience of dying.
Professor Robert Bernasconi, really it's a pleasure to be sitting here with you. And I'm going to start by asking you about the debate that's going on in the UK right now regarding assisted dying. The reason being is that raises so many issues. And again, from a philosophical perspective, there's the ethics, there's religion, there's legality. What's your take on what's happening?
That's a very difficult question. I personally, I'm not attached to life. And I'd be perfectly happy to die right now. I mean, you'd probably like me to finish the interview.
Last 20 minutes.
Yes, I'll do my best. But so, for me, life is a wonderful thing. And yet, I don't have that sense. I have a sense of responsibility that I'm taking up space, I'm doing so on and so forth. Now, I entirely understand all the back and forth about the issues, that people could be pressurized to take death rather than continue when they don't want to. And that sounds like a horrible thing, but I also understand people who are in pain. So it's just a question of trying to find arrangements so that people can be confident in the system.
I can say honestly, in 10,000 plus interviews over the years, I've never had anyone say they could be happy to die right now. I mean, I've heard people say they're not scared of death. Mm-hmm. They're not worried about, death. It's an inevitability. But I'm just baffled. Sorry, I'm going to delve into this a bit, but just ask, where does this detachment from life come?
Well, I've just had a wonderful life. I mean, I'm
there's a
so
lot more,
blessed.
Hopefully, isn't there?
Well, I'm 74 years old, so not that much more.
74 is young.
Yeah, to some people. I mean, no doubt if I do live to 94, I'll think about when I was 74 and think, oh, I was young back in those days. But no, I'm perfectly happy with the idea that I've had a great life. I think I've done some good things and some bad things, and I just don't want to ruin it. Aristotle says, you can only tell whether a person was happy, had eudaimonia is his word, after they're dead. And right now, I think I would be on the plus side. Maybe I'll go off and do something wrong and wish I died before this interview if I say the wrong thing today.
Professor Fausto Fresopi, thank you so much for spending some time with us. The big debate currently in society, certainly in the UK, is this concept of assisted dying. And what that does is it raises a lot of questions about what ethics are. From a philosopher's perspective, how do we set ethical boundaries?
So the problem is, in my view, don't fall in eugenetics. We already known from many decades ago. The problem is assisting dying is voluntarily or willingly asked from the patient. Why not? There is no ethic boundaries. But the ethic boundary will be strong or too strong when the society decide when is the case or not. And precisely where the point on which philosophy have something to say is if there is the case or not. It's not a matter of taxonomy if there is if it's the case or not, but a matter of general conception of life and when a life is worthy to live to the end, even with sickness, even with handicaps, and so on and so on. In my view, the extreme boundary and the extreme danger is the eugenetics. When a society settle taxonomies to say, okay, we can intervene for assisting that.
Let me get on to what has been the subject of this philosophy conference, quality of life, because that's actually the precursor to this debate.
Yes.
And I guess it comes down to how we judge quality of life. Now, there's obviously medical illness and serious conditions that warrant a different level of discussion. There's quality of life in terms of what people perceive as wealth or capability, financial capability. What is quality of life in your terms?
There's a very sharp distinction in the history of philosophy between quantity and quality. Quantity, we all know, quantity is opulence, a mass of goods, but quality is something quite different. I think quality is the capacity to reveal what is singular in life, what is non-negotiable in life, what is radically singular and particular. Now, I believe that each and every one of us must think that problem of singularity through, must think the relationship between what is singular and what is qualitative. Now, if you ask me as a philosopher, I will tell you that what is most important in this qualitative ideal is time, temporality, how to use our time, how to think through the utilization of our time, of our temporality as existence, but also our time with others, our time that we share with others in our communities, in our families, even in regards to our country, etc.
My mother, as a personal note, my mother went through years of Parkinson's disease, and at one point she said to me, as she was losing her physical capabilities, her mind was still sharp, she said, "This is not living, it's existence." That resonated with me. So how do we determine what a person is entitled to in terms of quality of life?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because you're marking the distinction between life and existence. Now, perhaps I should make something quite obvious. Existence, the word existence, means actually to step out of oneself, transcend oneself. It comes from the existence, it means to come out of oneself. I'm very attached to this idea. I'm very attached to this idea because I believe that human life must constantly and incessantly transcend itself. One must transcend itself, out of itself, into a betterment of oneself, into the qualitative ideal of a temporality that stretches out. The main problem for me when I think about the idea of quality of life is that we often reduce temporality. We often reduce temporality to a particular goal. I want such and such a thing. I want to achieve such and such a job. I want to achieve such and such a situation. We restrict temporality to succeeding in a particular goal or a particular appropriation of a goal. I would rather, and remaining faithful to this idea of existing, I would like us to think quality of life as stretching out time.
This leads me almost perfectly onto where society has gone in terms of quality of life. I mean, many people, myself sometimes also, bemoan the fact that we've become so short-term in our thinking. We have lost as society our understanding of the difference between need and want.
Yes.
And it's driven very much by want, so much more than need. And that kind of detaches us from the real needs on this planet, between societies and cultures and so on. So when we think of quality of life in those terms, how can we bring ourselves back to understanding these differences? When you have a conference looking at the quality of life, how do you get people to consider this and not think short term and materialistically?
Yeah, no, I think I mean you're putting your finger on a very important topic, and I think a topic that will be discussed throughout our conference. That is, how can we instill in our lives, in the quality of our lives, the possibility to invent or to think outside the box, to be very pragmatic in my speech. That is, think outside the box, invent outside the determined modalities of our thinking. You were asking me about where has society gone. I feel today, politically, sociologically, anthropologically, even geographically, I feel that we have reached a point where our humanity is extremely determined in the simple repetition of inherited ideas. I believe what we need is to reinvent these inherited ideas.
But what are these inherited ideas based on?
They're based on a tradition, and I'm all for the enhancement of our tradition, but I'm also thinking that our humanity, and this is why I'm so attached to this project here in Riyadh, is that we are incessantly seeking to reinvent our tradition. That is, take our tradition and our different traditions. It's an international conference. People from all walks of life, not only philosophers, scientists, not only people from the Middle East, but also people from all over the world are coming to Riyadh to take what our traditions have given us and invent a commonality of humanity. And this is what I feel and fear we have lost in many of our societies. The power to invent and reinvent what we receive.
The conference, the Riyadh International Philosophy Conference, the theme for this year has been quality of life. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, where this fits into what you might define as quality of life.
Well, in my talk, I talked about how the quality of life has become the slogan in well-being league tables put out by the World Health Organization and other similar organizations. And I just feel that they have entirely missed the point. That too easily this becomes an instrument for governments to be competing against each other, to be higher up in the league table. They're more likely to go higher up in the league table if they're keeping the middle class happy rather than addressing poverty or systemic issues like climate change. And so I just think that the whole emphasis is wrong. And so in my talk, I was talking about poverty and hunger, and why I would prefer to see that as the issue, and global poverty. It shouldn't be countries competing against each other to be better than the other one. We should be trying to pull up the people who need the most help.
So when it comes to the term quality of life, what's your definition of it? Oh,
I don't have a definition. I'm not that kind of philosopher, thankfully. So I just think the phrase, which basically, not many people know this, but it gained currency because President Lyndon Johnson used it in a talk he gave in Madison Gardens.
Yeah.
Thank you, yes, in 1964. And then all these economists went off and thought, oh, that's what we should be talking about, not GDP, but quality of life. And so that's why they tried to measure it and so on. But I think that, again, it's always going to be different for different people and different cultures. And I think trying to make this a competition is a mistake.
Do you find the world of philosophy is a shrinking one?
Oh, that's a very provocative, in its own sense, it's a very provocative question. At times, I do feel philosophy is shrinking. That is, I do feel philosophy is becoming ever more so specialized and structured only on the repetition of its own tradition, which is an extremely rich tradition. And certainly we need that form of specialization in universities, in research centers, and I'm a professional philosopher, so I'm not going to criticize that. But at the same time, I do feel that what philosophy really needs and how philosophy can really help, because we always say philosophy cannot help our society, they're abstract and they're living in their ivory towers in Cambridge and Oxford or wherever, but where philosophy can really truly help is to develop and deploy in what is common, what is to reveal in what is common, what is singular. That is from where we can reinvent ourselves. I think philosophy has a task today to insist on the reinvention of our humankind.
Is the problem that philosophy is considered elite? Is that the issue?
No, it's one of the problems. It's one of the problems, and I think philosophy has a great responsibility in that elite manner of appearing, and I think philosophy must, in a way, come down from that elite status and become much closer to our everyday life. But at the same time, I would never want philosophy to let go of its radicality, and its radicality is what? Its radicality is, again, the possibility for the subject to transcend itself, for the human subject to transcend itself, to become other than itself, to reinvent itself.
Do you, as a philosopher, often change your ideas, your philosophies?
Constantly. And I think, if I may be a little bit provocative even about philosophy, I think one of the great dangers of philosophy and of philosophy as a discipline is to always pretend that coherence is the sole motivator for human beings. I think there is a value to uncoherence, the possibility of constantly and incessantly changing to adapt to our singular existential situations. The situation of 1968 is not the same situation in 2024. We need to have not only evolved from 68 to 2024, but rethink the very concepts that were used in 68, rethink those concepts for 2024. That means constantly and incessantly change.
Do you think there has been a change in this global society that's now being created by the internet, the World Wide Web, interconnectivity at a global level? Is there a change in philosophy? Is there a better exchange of understanding of ideas?
Yeah, I would say the culture interact when there is, at first and foremost, commercial exchange. So the beginning of the Renaissance, the rise of Columbus, then the rise of the companies to the east, the Jesuit company already increased the knowledge from the west to the east, and so on and so on. Now we live in a globalized world. This is my matter of study, in a complex world. And in this case, of course, technologies can help to a dialogue, but I will say as a platform, not as a form of dialogue. The dialogue must be established person to person in such conferences, in long dialogues, not with smart messages and all what the platforms provide to us.
Thinking of different cultures, is philosophy as a subject, is it universal, or is it very much divided along cultural lines and, I guess, religious lines, ethnic lines?
Well, obviously there's been a huge variety of philosophies, and I'm not a mainstream philosopher. I've done quite well. I got a job, but I'm not one of those people who is trying to conform to whatever the fashion is. So quite honestly, I think a lot of current philosophy is not very interesting. I think it's geared towards an academic audience. It doesn't know how to get beyond that. It's geared towards trying to publish as many articles as possible. And so I think philosophy has lost its way. And one of the luxuries of having a job with tenure is that I can do what I want.
What would be your version of what philosophy should be then?
I think it should be trying to hear voices from more different people. And that's why I think that to a certain extent, what we call Western philosophy is somewhat played out, at least in terms of what it's become. I'm not denying the wonderful classics that I enjoy studying. So I'm not one of these people against the great books, as it were. But I do think that if we could hear more from people from India, from Saudi Arabia, from Algeria, wherever, I just think that that is what will refresh and renew philosophy, because it's coming from different conditions, different contexts. People have different intuitions depending on where they're brought up.
Well, my intention would be to speak with you a lot longer, but I'm going to ask you a final question as we are running out of time. And that would be, is philosophy as a concept, as a source of inspiration and kind of debate in society, is it dying?
I want to make a very firm distinction here. I think if I look at academic philosophy as it's practiced in many elite institutions, I would say it deserves to die. If you look at the issues that ordinary people have that we need to introduce or reintroduce back into philosophy, then it'll never die.
Professor Robert Bernasconi, what a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
I enjoyed it too.
Thank you. Professor Versopi, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you too.
Thank you, sir. Well, Dr. Joseph Cohen, what a pleasure. You've provoked a lot of thought here, I hope, with the people watching. Certainly have with me. Real pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank
you
you very much. Thank you.
Some thoughts there on how the ancient tradition of philosophy can be applied to very current issues that are being passionately debated in some parts of the world today. Thanks to all my guests for their respectful, considered and sensitive contributions they brought to this episode. I'm Riz Khan from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.